This week on The Futurists, Zuzanna Stamirowska.
So machines don't think like we do, right? They don't think like humans in real time.
Right.
So for me, the very big direction is to have machines that think in real time like we do.
Welcome back to The Futurists. This week we are going to get in again into all things the future. I have with me my co-host, Katie King, Miss Metaverse. Welcome back, Katie.
Happy to be back here.
Rob might join us at some point, but he's sort of on the road and having some technical difficulties connecting, so might just be the two of us. But what have you been seeing in the news lately regarding AI? Anything that's caught your eye in particular?
Oh, well, yeah, there's a ton of things happening, a lot of developments, people discussing the ethics of AI and where all that's heading. And, overall, now I've been talking about this lately, how there's new ways of trying to interfere with certain data sets that these AIs are drawing upon. So, there's new tools like Nightshade that are coming out, to poison the data set. So I find that really interesting. I think we'll be seeing more of these things moving forward.
Yeah, no, I there's obviously a ton of effort to try and codify, at least some guide rails or guardrails, if you want, for a better term, for what's happening in the space. I saw Obama talking about AI this week. I must have done an event or something, but it was up on social, talking about how the best analogy for the wide-ranging effects of artificial intelligence is probably the best that they could come up with is electricity.
Oh, yeah. And it's all about free speech and, the future of the internet, right? So I think we'll have people on both sides of the arguments debating this greatly on X.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to get into that, our guest today runs an organization called Pathway. And she is a practitioner in the field, ex-Googler, Googlers on her team, Google Brain people, and so forth. Really interesting to talk to her, and that is Zuzanna Stamirowska. Zuzanna, welcome to The Futurists.
Hello. I'm grateful and very happy to be here with you guys.
Very cool. So you've done a lot of work in the supply chain arena.
I did, yeah.
But Pathway you say in respect to the sort of pitch on Pathway that you guys are a single integrated processing layer for real-time intelligence. So I'm just sort of wondering, I can get why on the supply chain side that AI is going to be impactful, but how did you get from that side of the business to essentially, this sort of mechanism for integrating real-time intelligence?
Oh, this is a great question. So I'd say it's real-time kind of mixed with the ability to apply advanced algorithms, and ML within the same project where you need to deliver stuff, and the emphasis is on actually delivering stuff that work in production, that don't end up in a sort of prototype limbo, something that happens with probably most of the data and ML projects right now. So for us, really, we were faced with some challenges in supply chain data, indeed. And I'm the author of the state-of-the-art forecasting model for maritime trade. So somehow this is how we got into the field, and it's how we were able to see where the pain points were. And being the coders that we are, and most of the team actually comes from a competitive programming background. I mean, they've been the best programmers in the world in the ICM ICPC contests. Actually, we knew the solutions, but it was very tough to make them work in production, to scale them, and to make them work robustly, especially if you come as this, let's say, ML engineer, software developer persona that wants to get the project done and running. So this is something that we've seen. This is something we've been solving ourselves before actually funding Pathway. And that was even before, the LLM era. I mean, Jan, our CTO, who actually was at Google Brain, he worked before on like the earlier attention mechanisms. So one of our, actually we're backed by Łukasz Kaiser, who's a co-author of the Attention is all you need paper. So this is like the team GPT, right? The transformers. We, of course, came from these intuitions, knowing how things will evolve. And we saw what was kind of the missing bit that was needed in order to make things move the needle. It's pretty much just the question. I mean, ourselves coming from some of the I'd say some of the top theoretical computer science folks. I mean, we have them on the team, right? But there's one thing, which is inventing cool algorithms, writing papers about them, and having them stuck somewhere, at the conference, maybe having a lot of citations, and actually translating this and putting it in production and like for the benefit of the society to really move the needle. And I think the team first got together around this idea of having real impact for the real economy and moving the needle for enterprises, for society, like having an impact really.
Because right now we talk a lot about these LLMs, but we're really talking more about platform AI or personal AI, where it is, sort of conversational integration, replacing search engines, sort of integrated into your, day-to-day technology space. But when we talk about supply chain automation in particular, we're really talking about industrial level artificial intelligence and the ability to automate large sections of the way society works today, which is very manual, the ports, shipping, road transportation, resource management, all of these areas of the functional element of the economy, not so much focused on the individual. So we don't hear as much about the LLM work or the machine learning in that sort of industrial AI, with the exception of things like self-driving cars. But obviously, I think China, with its Belt and Road Initiative and the work that they've been doing on automation, is very focused on more of this sort of industrial AI. Would you say that that's the case? Am I reading that correctly?
Absolutely. So I'd say that right now, when we look at LLMs, they're mostly seen by the public as this kind of single-tone, user-facing applications, right? We like the main intuition we have about Gen AI LLMs is like whatever we see in ChatGPT, and this is kind of where our imagination, or like the public's imagination, is. The way we see LLMs at Pathway is that they're a tool that you can plug in data pipelines. And then they're not necessarily used for the generative purposes. They actually can even be used, we talk a lot about hallucinations, how LLMs hallucinate, but they can even be used to control human hallucinations, which can mean, for example, just correcting mistakes that happen when there's some data entry happening. This means structuring data upstream that can be then used downstream in machine learning models for prediction. Right. It's not necessarily, you don't need to run every prediction in LLM, but you may use use it at different steps of a process to deliver a full application. And this application may answer questions of the sort, when is my container arriving? Or when should I pick up my container? If you think of it, like we have 80% of all international trade that travels on ships. Okay, so this is like it's just enormous.
And
it's a business we don't think about. But
about half of that is energy related stuff, like shipping coal and crude oil and petroleum and natural gas
and garbage,
and garbage, recycled garbage. Used to be.
And then 70% of this is in containers. So here we're talking about the containerized transport.
And so we've heard a lot of stuff about IoT, being able to track individual containers, as well as being able to track the contents of those containers, essentially making shipping machine readable. I mean, that's really
yes. But then we see
right?
actually, for IoT, we see that its value is being somehow stuck because of this inability to take the measurements and actually kind of
do
abstract
something with
or
the data.
aggregate the data to treat it properly. And we see it, and this is where the interesting real-time element kicks in. Because you have measurements that are generated. This is a great example. You have measurements generated by IoT sensors that come from containers, ships, whatever assets you have moving. And then you have to ingest this data, you have to clean it and put it together to show a process. Because otherwise, you're just left with a table of data where the only information you really get is like this container is at these coordinates,
right?
Which is not super interesting from the business perspective. It's interesting only if you're really, really, really interested in that very container. And then people say, hey, if I don't have so many issues with my transport usually, and this container, like the contents are not worth so much, I wouldn't be investing in IoT. However, you can have a data sample. You don't even need to equip all the containers or all the assets. You can have a data sample generated by IoT. This actually alleviates some issues with data integration, etc., because you can get a good view of your processes as they are from sampling a transport or logistics network. Then you put it together automatically. You clean it from all fun stuff that you can see there, like GPS jammers in Russia. Honestly, things we've seen in data sets.
GPS jammers.
You have to clean it, put together, and build something that, to a business user resembles a map. But this map disappears automatically. And they see their locations, like some steps of the processes that we're not aware of, things that their subcontractors are doing, some optimizations that are being done by people in the field. And actually logistics runs by human optimization, usually at this like last mile, let's say, like really at the points of the process. There's a lot of optimization done by operations people that once you have the data, you can actually learn it and share it as best practices.
Well, and then you can do, as you say, the predictive pieces of it. Once if you've got 2 points in time, you can start making extrapolations.
That's it. The moment you get the structure, on this structure, you can run predictions, right? And actually getting that one data model on which you can work was usually taking the most of time and was actually, or already, even without the real-time element, was an enormous challenge.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get back to Pathway and what you're doing there and, the type of AI you guys are building. And I want to talk about smart contracts as well. But before that, maybe let's delve a bit into your background. When was it first that you figured out that you wanted to be in the artificial intelligence arena or even as a futurist in this space now, when you sort of came to the conclusion that you're working in the business of building the future?
I think I'm just a very curious person that follows her interests. There's like, I wouldn't make any compromise about this. So at some point, I think around 2010, I did an internship at a company called Spot.com. That was the largest community of competitive programmers. And competitive programmers meaning best coders in the world and actually the best algorithms people. And most of the best algorithms folks switched to AI when AI became the thing a bit later on. Many of them. So it's actually a community that's very much overlapping, which something that you can actually see on the Pathways team. This is how we got to know each other. So that was definitely a moment when, I kind of went into this community and I learned it and I fell in love with it. And then there are things, that I did at uni, of course. So at some point I took a course in game theory. So for me, really the road into tech was through game theory. I took a course at Stockholm School of Economics and somehow I just fell in love with it. I felt it was just so intuitive. And then I went to study at the École Polytechnique, which is the French military engineering school. They go to like Nobel Prizes in physics, etc., etc. So I specialize, in fact, in game theory on graphs. And I'd say the key here is graph. And graph means everything distributed, large, and complex, especially if it evolves over time. And this is how I got into transportation and logistics. So it's through this. And then the question of, okay, I see the system, I see it evolving, I want to describe its rules, and then I want to predict it. Were very obvious. It happens that once you get into graphs, you get into random walks. When you get into random walks, and kind of this like random processes, you very soon get into some fundamentals of AI. This is, let's say, a part that's better covered by my co-founders, especially Adrian Kosowski. But you get very deep quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean the types of AIs that we're talking about. I mean, as you said, yes, there is learning models, LLMs, but they're not generative in respect to the way we'd think of something like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, these types of programs in the art space. But they're more in terms of predictive, and analytics in terms of the functional elements of movement of goods and services and stuff like that. I get it. We're going to come back to this in the next half because I want to talk about where the world goes with this stuff. But just before we do go to the break, I mean, we've seen a lot of progress in AI recently with ChatGPT and so forth. What's the biggest areas of progress happening in the supply chain arena right now in terms of AI use?
I'd say that right now it's mostly focused around knowledge. So really knowledge access and the ability to share knowledge from various documents. So this will happen thanks to the LLMs. The biggest kind of elephant in the room use case, which will generate most of the value, is of course forecasting of the processes themselves. So there is a question of ETAs, and then the way you can see it is that you can use LLMs to structure data to feed into ETA, so estimated times of arrival prediction. And if you think about orchestrating transportation flows, well, obviously knowing when something will arrive and getting an update that your ship is going to be delayed, etc., is a key piece of information you need to make the system work.
Yeah.
I have a question. So in your opinion, who are the biggest players in AI right now?
In this particular area, yeah.
In this particular area. And what are some ways that they're lacking? Is there any ways that they're lacking that we can improve on over the next, say, 5 years?
Biggest players in AI in this area, I'd say these definitely are just the practitioners. I mean, you have the logistics companies, the transportation companies. I mean, when you talk about maritime, it's a very centralized business. So you have like 5 companies that control most of the market, really. And the multis in the data. So I'd say this is the key place. Then, of course, there are some like log-tech companies that were focused and were developing ML systems that was prior to the LLM revolution. I wouldn't say that we see so much of. I don't see a clear leader on this market. And then, I mean, there's of course us.
Yeah. Well,
right.
It's obviously it's a pretty interesting arena. Just before we go to break, we like to do this thing we call the quick fire round, just so our listeners can get to know you a little better. These questions are designed to be super punchy, so you don't have to do a long answer, just a couple of word answer if you like. All right.
Okay.
All right. So first of all, what was the first science fiction or story you remember being exposed to on TV or books?
Star Wars.
Yeah, fair enough. What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
Electricity. And now AI. And I totally agree. I totally agree. AI is like electricity.
Very cool. Is there any futurists or entrepreneurs in the past that have particularly influenced you, and why?
John von Neumann. This is like the figure that I actually even talk about the von Neumann effect. This is the moment when somebody gets a Nobel Prize and you think, oh, I heard of, I mean, I thought of it, but I thought it was trivial. Then there's, of course, Tesla,
Yes.
right? People really ahead of their times.
Yeah. Yeah, good, couple of good suggestions. In respect to the area you work in, has anyone represented the future you think is coming in science fiction very well? So is there a science fiction story you could point to that talks about the automated world in a way that fits your vision?
Well, there's a bit of I think I'm Polish, right? So of course there's Stanisław Lem. So these are maybe some of the scenarios that we may be worrying about.
Yeah. All right, cool. Great. Well, you're listening to The Futurists. We're going to take a quick break. And after the break, we'll be back with Zuzanna
Stamirowska.
Thank you, Katie, to talk about where we're going with this technology. What is the world of autonomous markets, autonomous shipping and supply chain look like in the time of the future? You're listening to The Futurists. We'll be right back after this break. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcasts, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific, and the FinTech 5. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network, and Next Gen Banker. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm here with my co-host, Brett King, and joining us is Zuzanna Stamirowska. We're talking about, in the first half, the supply chain and how AIs are impacting the way things are being analyzed and logged, and LLMs and all of that. Now, in the second half, let's get into the good stuff here. We're going full future. But before we begin, I want to talk about what is the importance of enabling AI to unlearn. Can you share on that, Zuzanna?
Yeah, absolutely. So unlearning is a bit of a crucial feature of a system that is to be responsive to things that are happening around us. And it's also crucial to enable ethical behavior, right? For example, in Europe, we have something like the right to be forgotten. How can you do that if your AI can't unlearn? And if you think of it, if you think about LLMs, they most probably kind of rigorously just cannot unlearn by the sole definition. Because they compress information at input. We have just like more data at input than we have weights, right? So it can be, they are most likely unable to learn, and you can imagine the situation as a person who is standing in one position and doing 10 steps forward. They end up in one position, right? Imagine then a situation in which you do 1 step left, go 10 steps forward, and 1 step right. If you're on the flat plane, you end up in the same position as in the first scenario, and that's great. And this is similar to unlearning. So you kind of end up in the same state, regardless of the fact that you took this 1 step left. So you forgot it in a way. But this is not the space in which we operate in LLMs. We actually operate in a space which is multidimensional. We may imagine it as kind of standing on a hill. So you have a convexity of the space, and when you take this 1 step left, actually you're being shifted. So when you take 1 step right, again, to correct your initial misstep, let's say, you end up in a different place.
Yeah, because
so
when
really
we think
unlearn.
about the way machine learning actually happens with the like perceptrons and pathways, the neural pathways we're forming, those sort of become the more you have that wrong turn, the more it'll get reinforced over time if you're not careful, right?
Indeed, and you don't know how it propagates. So here actually comes some of the intuitions from the random walks that I was talking before. You're a bit of a walker, right? And you can end up, because the space is so multidimensional, you can end up in strange places. And maybe simpler analogy is just that, well, when you're a violin player, you're playing violin, you were taught number of pieces in your childhood. If somebody comes to you and asks you, oh, listen, just forget about the first piece of Beethoven that you learned to play. I mean, you wouldn't know how to go about this because you don't know how it contributed to, the way you're holding your violin, for example. How did it really contribute to your skill? So this is something that's most likely impossible to be done, and like some intuitions go through Lie brackets. So in math, let's say this here, we can leave it aside for now. But then there are some things that can be done in traditional machine learning where you can forget. And for LLM specifically, you can control unlearning by looking at the data you feed into the context. So this is now called RAG, right? We have the kind of in-context learning, and the fact that you can look at the LLM as a tool, as the skill of playing the violin, whereas you would treat the music pieces as something you feed into, like as a music notes that you're giving to the player. And when you can control that, you can also just remove music pieces from the data set that you're feeding into the LLM, so you can forget. So this is one part of the story, that you have updates to the data that you take in account immediately, and then you forget stuff. Then there's a number of traditional models like classification, like clustering, etc., that we have at Pathway actually running in real time, with the ability to unlearn, such that when you delete a new data, you delete some data, or you add the data, but actually, for example, classification results should be different, you would automatically update past results as well. So, like, a definition of unlearning is that you should behave as if you've never seen that input.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So losing the memory. So this sort of gets us into really the premise of Pathway itself, which you talk about real-time intelligence. And, Pathway is a nice name to sort of talk about neural pathways, at least, and so forth.
Or it brings us to Westworld.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
We also love this name. I mean, there is a full post about why we choose it.
Yeah, cool. So, but in terms of the real-time intelligence piece, are you talking about different AIs sharing their intelligence in real time, or what is it that real-time intelligence in the AI arena means for you in terms of Pathway?
If you think of it, just thinking about machine learning or AI or even LLMs, I mean, their intelligence is stuck in the moment in time. It's kind of just this, because you feed in a training data set, right? You train, then you have the model and it operates. But usually the training happens on a data set. And even if you go to GPT, well, now it was trained on the data up to a certain date. That's a fact. The question is how to make it reactive, how to make it react to the flow of data as it happens, right?
So changing conditions or sort of adaptive intelligence?
Yeah, adaptive intelligence. So you get into continuous learning.
Right.
And then also how to react to the fact that, some data points are deleted, etc., and the situation changes. So
much more sort of dynamic model in terms of the LLM, because you're forcing new data into the mix all the time, rather than having like just a massive pool of data and that sort of becomes fixed, which is sort of the problem right now is all these people involved in training LLMs. So, how does it look different in a real-time world from that training arena that we've seen for players like OpenAI and Google and so forth?
So for LLMs, I believe so far we don't have real-time LLM training. And we realized we're actually thinking hard about this at Pathway, and we saw that the opportunity is really in the context layer. So such that you pre-process and you control the data, you feed into the LLM, and you look at the LLM as a skill. So this is, and then the second part of the story are traditional machine learning methods, that you can run continuously. And this is something we have at Pathway. I mean, everybody can benefit from it, for our GitHub repo. Here, this is non-trivial, of course. Real-time learning and making sure the updates happen. It's a challenge, like just the models running in real time are a challenge on its own. And then there's the entire question about engineering around systems that work with data updates. So it's just extremely, extremely tough to put real-time systems in production, when you want to do simple stuff, and not even mentioning machine learning.
Right.
So we cracked it, I'd say.
Well, congrats. So just to
Nice.
give some perspective for the audience, because I don't think this is something that's talked about a lot, compared with sort of this real-time model that you're talking about. For LLMs, these big LLMs that we've seen in the market most recently, the ChatGPTs and so forth, the generative AI stuff, how long would it take to train one of those LLMs to get to the point where they are today versus a real-time model?
Oh, it really depends, right? Because I'm not talking about trading LLMs in real time. So I wouldn't say it's comparable, but I know that, I mean, the researchers are looking sometimes at months, right, of
Right.
training for the LLMs. And then it is a batch job, and it's going to be a batch, meaning that, you take a batch of data kind of and you train on it. And it's going to be like this for a while. So and then when we talk, and of course it consumes resources, which are incredible, right? The sizes and all. You look at the budgets of AI companies, you look at some like startups that are to launch their own LLMs, how much they have to raise to just have GPU to be able to churn the data. Actually, when you go into the real-time learning or real-time paradigm, you use much less resources because you only look at the data updates and how they impact whatever you've seen in the past, but you don't need to recompute everything from scratch every time you learn something new. I'm assuming it's a full paradigm shift in terms of efficiency of computing.
Right. I'm assuming also you have, your model limitations, your model in terms of where it's built is sort of built around the data rather than going out with masses of data and trying to find a model from within the data sets.
Yes.
And
exactly.
You can be much more specific with it, right?
So Pathway is really a framework for developers. So it's applied to the data of the user, right? And what Pathway gives to the user is like, as I started, you're a software developer or an ML engineer, and your job is to deliver, for example, estimated times of arrival, to be able to answer a question of when will my truck arrive? The stuff you have to do, you have to identify what my truck means, right? This is one thing you have to search for. Then you may need to structure the data somewhere, get info, search maybe in some through some emails, etc., to know if there's a delay. Calculate the ETA and send it out to the user. So these are sorts of the projects that are being used, but then the data is identified and is kind of defined by the project itself. Here the model is not so much in the data; it's really in the logic and the business application you want to deliver.
In your opinion, what is your vision of the future when it comes to AI and automation? Could talk about in referral to shipping and transport, but what will this look like, let's say, in 20 to 30 years from now? I mean, how far out can it go, actually?
Actually, going back to real time, I think this is the one theme that we really have as a team that we are, constantly cracking. So if you think about, we just talked about LLMs being trained on a large chunk of data, and then this, maybe being enhanced with RAG, I mean, being enhanced with context. But when we talk here, you just learned something from me, right? You learned about real time, and you already updated your vision of the world. Probably we'll process it a bit more maybe when we finish the show. But you reacted, right? It's already kind of in your head. You already processed this, and you can ask me questions like precisely about this. I mean, having updated a number of stuff, maybe your view about the world, right? And this is just not how the systems currently are working. So machines don't think like we do, right? They don't think like humans in real time.
Right.
So for me, the very big direction is to have machines that think in real time, like we do. And to get there, there's a number of things to crack. There's, of course, the engineering part of just dealing with real-time data, with streaming data. This is extremely difficult. And you would be surprised by kind of how underdeveloped these technologies were. So that was a big kind of gap in the technology space, because it's also very difficult to make it happen. And then the second part is
getting
learning
into
itself,
that,
right?
Let's get futuristic. I mean, how does the world operate in 30 years with these technologies as they mature?
So first thing is that you have automated orchestration of flows, right? When we talk about logistics, you have automated orchestration of flows in such a way that when you have a delay, it's automatically, for example, rebooked on a different ship, or with a different transport. So this is one part of it. There's a question of the role of IoT and edge devices, kind of just edge in general. So to what extent will we get autonomous? Can we imagine having autonomous containers, for example, in such a way that kind of they do computation somehow locally, maybe combining it with a bit of information about the system, at a given scale, and then have some local knowledge, and actually they would be able to make decisions a bit like the logistics operators are making them right now. So this is part of it. And definitely, I mean, the easy thing is just automation of processes, and this includes business processes, everything that's linked to paperwork, which oddly enough in shipping and supply chain, I mean, we're actually, it's the electronic bill of lading is actually a very fresh thing. It was paper for a long time. So this is let's say in the space of logistics and shipping. Then for the machines that think, well, I'd say that my colleagues are not so happy, or maybe not so enthusiastic about the vision for the humanity, in the sense that we're going to have machines that are going to be behaving much more like us. And
I'm not as concerned about the nightmare scenario stuff. I think the bigger implication for AI that we don't talk about nearly enough is technology unemployment. Right. And what you're talking about here, we are looking for large scale efficiency gains, reducing energy utilization. All of those things are the benefits that come with this, better forecasting, more optimal shipping, configurations and transportation mechanisms. That's resource utilization, making the planet more sustainable.
But this is probably something we can do already, It's not something that is too far technologically. Right. It's more of a question of adoption, to be perfectly honest. Algos are there. I think we start to be able to deploy it. It is an adoption question, and just making sure things can move, and they can move with enterprises, and the entire topic around this.
No, I get that, Zuzanna, but surely, if we have large scale automation at this level, most other parts of artificial intelligence is going to affect jobs in the sector, right? In transportation and in shipping and in ports and things like that. That seems fairly inevitable.
It might. The way it's being seen right now is that it's more of an enabler. So there is this support decision, and oddly enough, what people see is that it's still important to have somebody to blame for a mistake. So you need accountability, for example, in autonomous ships.
Right.
Even though it would be possible, I mean, it's not such a heavy traffic as what you would expect, on the road. But then you need a person to blame if something goes wrong. You need accountability.
But you could. I've seen models with convoys of ships. You could have a lead ship that has the human, attached to, and having a convoy situation. There's been because you could use vehicle to vehicle integration and stuff like that. So there are some ways to keep humans involved, but still we're talking about dramatic reduction in the workforces the more we apply this automation. I wonder if this is the place where it's going to be produced the most. Because I imagine there may be sectors where actually it can be way more. Yes, no, I would agree with
way
that.
harsher, especially all the kind of office work that can be easily automated. One thing I've been just thinking about is like, all the product marketing could be doing automatically.
Right. Yeah.
This is something that would replace just armies of people, right?
I'm sure the Facebook AI is listening to us right now, getting ready to automate some product marketing in that direction.
Yeah, exactly. So this is part of it. I mean, but then I'd say there is a question about how far are we from general artificial intelligence. I mean, I don't believe it goes through LLMs necessarily,
right?
But just that the road
could be a different model.
Is a bit shorter,
right?
Because
well, at least
we made great progress.
Yeah, we're learning how to teach machines. I guess that's what is coming out of it. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, I do talk a lot about in my books, particularly Technosocialism. I talked about smart economies, and I don't think that a lot of in the West, I'm not sure that there's still a real understanding of the fact that if you want these highly autonomous economies with supply chain and automation, and all of those sorts of things, it's a very different direction from sort of the industrial age stuff. So the smart contracts, things like that.
All of the sudden, you get into a distributed setting, and
right.
This distribution, like the fact that you have a local model, this is something that kicks in at all the places, including smart contracts.
No, I think and that's, I mean, operationally, that's how we're going to build these smart economies. We'll have this type of automation, but you need smart contracts. You need, one of the areas we didn't talk about is, these different shipping organizations. Are they going to have some sort of international standards for AIs to talk to each other? What's the translation layer between two different ports, or for cross-border trade? How's that
these
going to
things
work?
are already happening. They're already happening, but I'd say not so much at the AI level, but kind of just data standards. They agreed on a blueprint for how to call operation milestones not that long ago. So this is where we are. It's still kind of just a PDF where they describe how you should call a milestone of an operation. But the standardization is happening, of course. And when you look at them, they are very centralized and they operate globally. So it is very much needed and kind of obvious. Hopefully we'll get to a stage where they're going to be using AI for doing this. I mean, whatever form that AI will take, I'm not sure it's always going to be LLMs. And I think it's AI understood broadly. This includes just ML algorithms, and all of this bundled to deliver the use case, or rather to deliver a parcel to your doorstep.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough.
Exactly.
Do you have any more, Katie, before we wrap up?
No, I think we're all set, but we'd have to have Zuzanna on in the near future. We want to hear more for sure. It's interesting seeing what you're doing.
Yeah. We didn't really delve into smart contracts and stuff in all that great detail, but I guess, just sort of help us wrap up. Where can people find out more about what you're doing at Pathway and the work that you and your team are doing, Zuzanna?
Yeah, absolutely. So please visit our website, pathway.com, and our GitHub repo. This is where you can find our work. You can find our showcases, and you can actually just put your hands on Pathway and build your own stuff quickly. So this is combining real time with LLMs.
Fantastic.
This is where the magic happens.
And where can people find out more about yourself?
And just please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think this is the best channel.
Fantastic. All right, good. Well, thanks for joining us on The Futurists today. We'll watch the work that you and your team is doing with interest. I'm very interested in the supply chain, automation, smart economic stuff. I think, China is really right now, from an infrastructure perspective, doing some really interesting things, and in a broad societal level, their interest in AI and their the education that they've got for that, I think, means they'll be a really strong competitor in the area that you're talking about in particular, even more so than then, and this is the big dollar stuff. This is the trillions of dollars of international trade that is going to be impacted by this. It's not the consumer level stuff, well, it is. You're going to get a package and, delivered, but it's all of that stuff is really going to contribute to GDP growth insanely. So, yeah. Anyway.
Fun fact, we actually mapped the China train based on IoT.
Very cool.
Nice.
Do you, in that respect, have you got any sort of projections? I know you're not an economist, but where this, what sort of efficiency gain at an economy level this type of automation could produce?
It really depends on how it's being acted upon. So who makes the decision? That's right. Usually the difficulty. Of course, like ETAs, you can easily bring them down from, I'd say the gains at the order of days are very easy. Then you can get it down right now up to the level of like half a day or less. So you can get it very, very precisely. Now I'm talking about this large kind of transcontinental transport. Question is always kind of how do people leverage it and their own decision making. And this is what impacts not just the money kind of, but it also impacts the emissions, because you may adjust the speeds of ships depending on ETAs and stuff, how you orchestrate the flow. So this is actually even more important in a way. This impacts the emissions and pollutions of port cities.
Well, no, I think we didn't even get into blockchain either, so that's for next time. But Zuzanna, look, thanks for joining us on the Futurists today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had great fun.
No
Lovely
problem.
meeting you guys.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. Stay tuned for more information on some of these trends. A lot of action in AI right now. Don't forget to follow our guests as they come along, Zuzanna included. Obviously keep watching what guys like Robert Scoble and Brian Romley are talking about, who we've had on the show a few times, but they're really documenting some really interesting stuff in this. Brian on the personal LM side and Robert in terms of the new startups that are coming in the space. So definitely check that stuff out. So, and Katie, thanks for joining us again.
Happy to be back as always.
Absolutely. We'll see you guys next week. In fact, we'll see you
in the future.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.